Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 533, Watching the Authority. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I will continue with the test. Here, I look at the possibility that our lives are just one big test. Our whole life is some sort of spiritual test evaluated by God or some higher spiritual power, or who knows. Then it's on to watching the authority. Here, I look at authority and control and some of the consequences of that. Anyway, today's show will feature background footage from Pulliam Creek Trail. Pulliam Creek Trail is located in the northern area of Polk County. And to get there, take the Upward Road exit off of I-26. Near Hendersonville, North Carolina. Go northeast on Upward Road. After the road turns to just 2 lanes, take a right on Big Hungry Road. Big Hungry Road may be hard to follow due to some turnoffs along it. A good navigation app would be useful here. The trail head is along Big Hungry Road. You go down the trail and eventually it gets very steep as it descends down a gorge. When you get to the bottom, you're at the bottom of 2 waterfalls, one on the Green River and the other on Pulliam Creek. So now, let's continue with the test. The imaginary territories have a role here too, in the test. Perhaps the imaginary territories, as I said, they lie between us and God. So perhaps they're watching us take the test, making sure we don't cheat, perhaps, if there is a way to cheat, which I don't think there is. Oh well, you can't cheat at life. Well, if you do, you might get a D. So, on the test of life, and you might have a worse next existence. So, you want to do better. You want to do better at life. Sure. So you got to tune into the imaginary territories. More specifically, you got to tune into the east side. I go under the assumption that the east side does better on the test than the west side. The west side, with its cruelty and deception and greed and winner-take-all type attitude, I don't think God favors that. Well, I think God favors the east side, where people are kinder and they share knowledge, especially when it comes to how to make money or to how to make life easier, even if that knowledge might cause certain corporations to make less money. It's the overall benefit of the poorest people that makes the most difference in the east side. And if they do better, well, everyone will do better. So the east side emphasizes compassion, honesty, and, as I said, sharing resources and knowledge. Making sure everybody has a fair opportunity. It seems like that would score higher with God than the west side. More compassion and kindness and sharing knowledge and techniques and how to get ahead, so to speak. I think that's what God would like, instead of only a few corporations knowing the secrets to get ahead in life, and you have to pay them to find out. No, the knowledge of how to get ahead in life should be free and available to all. That's what the East Side says, and perhaps that's what God says too. So, there's some specifics of the East Side though. Well, they might apply to other imaginary territories too. Sure. But anyway, what am I talking about? Well, I guess one of the things is, well, what my function is. What do I do in the imaginary territories? Well, I guess I don't know. Sure, it's in my imagination. But what I imagine I might do is, well, I kind of help disseminate information. I kind of help with broadcasting and transmission. Sure. It's like I'm some sort of repeater station in a series of transmitters. So the transmitters might go from one East Side person to another, and the signal gets repeated. The message gets repeated, being broadcast further and further as the wave is carried through more and more broadcasting stations, repeaters, transmission towers. Perhaps that's what I function as. I'm helping spread the information of the East Side, perhaps along some kind of carrier wave. Perhaps I'm part of the carrier wave, carrying the information along, making it easier to transmit. Sure, and I feel that. I feel it's who I am. I'm part of this East Side. It's the most important part of my life. It's what I do. Sure. And sure, I might not be victorious in my life, but that's okay. As long as I'm contributing to the cause, as long as I'm leading humanity towards the East Side, that's all that matters. They might not arrive there in my lifetime, but someday they will. Sure, because I spread the influence of the East Side. And when the East Side becomes dominant, well, it will be the exact opposite of the Trump administration. Sure. Everything will be about welfare programs and helping the poor and educating the poor for free. Sure. Everything will be geared to making life more pleasant for those less fortunate than us. Then they'll do better, and next thing you know, we'll do better. It will all trickle up, from the poorest people to the richest people. But don't forget, put the money in the hands of the poor people. If you give poor people money, they'll spend it quickly, and it'll stimulate the economy. So, we have to be aware of our role in the imaginary territories. We have to realize that we're working with God. We have to take up the cause. The more we work with God, the higher we'll score on the test, and the more God will work with us and give us a better existence in the future. This is the most important thing in life, so we need to remember this. We need to spread compassion and love, show kindness to all. Sure, we could do better. We could do better on the test. Now it is time for watching The Authority. Well, just a little side note. Yes, it's January 12th, 2026. And the sad news has come in of Bob Weir's passing. Well, as a deadhead, this is horrible news to me. The end of an era. No more concerts, or at least no more Dead concerts. Of course, there's nothing like a Dead concert. I always had such a good time with the fans. They seemed so friendly, and I always got along with them well. So, as I said, the end of an era. A sad time for me. Well, moving along, what about watching The Authority? So, this section is extremely tricky and controversial. Every situation involving authority is different, so you always have to look at each situation with a set of fresh eyes and evaluate each situation involving authority individually. There could be severe consequences for the wrong decisions, of course, once it involves authority. So you have to think carefully and really look at all your options and the ramifications of any decisions you might make. So any advice I might give here is very generalized. And as I said, each situation must be evaluated individually. But authority can create some problems, which I'll elaborate on shortly. But I guess we'll start off first and perhaps come back to it again. Who watches the watchers? Who monitors those in authority? Is there any sort of accountability or control for those in authority? Of course, each situation is different, obviously. And I guess I'm talking about all situations of authority. I mean, you have parental authority. And I guess who might hold parental authority accountable might be people like the Division of Social Services or whatever corresponds to it in the area you live. And perhaps other authorities too, of course. Then you have authority at school. Who monitors the teachers? Then you have police authority. Well, who monitors them? Well, then it gets a little tricky because holding police accountable can be difficult, especially in situations like wrongful death. Police, have the standard, at least now, that it's not what a reasonable person would do in their situation, but rather how they feel at the moment and how that caused them to react. But anyway, and then you go on higher up. What about politicians? People in Congress? What about the president? Who watches the president? And of course, Trump is getting increasingly authoritarian here in 2026, so perhaps that's a good question. So you have to think of everybody in power. The military, people who work in intelligence services, other branches of government, and so on and so on. So we have to be aware of this. And perhaps we need more watchers to watch those in authority. Something to think about. Why do we have to watch people in authority? Can't we just trust them? Well, sometimes that's actually a good idea in some situations. Sure. And this might be more true when you're a child and you should trust your parents. But as an adult, and when you're talking about situations involving government authority or police authority, well, perhaps they should be watched and maybe not always trusted. But anyway, so as I said, authority, well, yes, in a lot of situations, in optimal situations, authority could be a good thing. At least it could be useful at times. And respecting authority and all that often pays off and is often a good idea. So something to think about. Even in adverse situations, you still should have respect for authority. At least as long as you can. Anyway, so moving along, but authority creates problems. Well, there could be guilt created by those in authority. You could feel guilty for doing something wrong that someone's in authority says you shouldn't have done. Well, I guess a lot of times that guilt is appropriate, but perhaps not always. And you have to think about this more specifically with religious authority. People in the church recommending what you should do based on their interpretation of God's will. Well, who knows what God's will really is? And perhaps it's best for you to interpret it yourself directly, or at least in certain situations, instead of relying on some other person to advise you what to do, when they might have hidden motives or hidden agendas trying to steer you one way or the other. And of course, sometimes it goes a little beyond you. If you're part of a family, let's say, then they're perhaps steering your whole family. Oh no. Yeah, you gotta be careful here. You have to think what's best for your family. And sometimes it might not always be what the church wants. You have to think about this. You have to think about guilt and authority. And if authority uses guilt kind of as a weapon, kind of as a way to control you. There we go. Control. That's what it's all about. Sure it is. Authority is about control. And, well, control can be bad, or a lot of times control is useful and good. Sure. Well, especially in situations with parents and children, control could be useful and good a lot of times to protect the children, to keep them safe in other situations. But sometimes control could be bad. It could be restrictive. Sure. How much control is needed? How much authority is needed? Well, I guess that depends on you. You have to think about yourself. How much self-control do you have? How well can you navigate your own life? Do you have good judgment? Well, if you have poor judgment or can't navigate life well, unfortunately, perhaps more authority might be needed in your life. Oh, gee. And it might not be much fun. So, it's better to back up try to gain control of your life. Try to know what to do. Use good judgment. Don't do something stupid just because someone told you to, or you think it's going to be fun. It might be way too risky for whatever fun you might get out of it. Each situation must be evaluated differently and individually. But if you have good judgment and you know how to run your life and you do well, perhaps you need less authority. So we need more people like that. More people who can control their lives and run it well on their own. Because authority can create many problems. As I said, there could be problems in the church from people in authority there interpreting God's will and guiding you to do something you might not want to do. But authority can get out of control in many ways and can create harm and suffering in many ways. That's why it needs to be held accountable, and somebody needs to watch it. Well, perhaps there was someone in the distant past watching over me, protecting me. Yes, it did happen. When? Way back in second grade, maybe in first grade too, or in kindergarten. Through that time period in early school. Well, having marginal autism, you got it. I'm setting myself up to be bullied. Of course, I didn't know it and perhaps didn't care, but that's what happens. And it's something I couldn't control. It's something I had. And so it's something I had to deal with. And sure, I would get bullied. People would make fun of me because I'm oohing. I'm lost in my own little world, making funny noises. Gee, I just didn't fit in on the playground, and I was subject to bullying. But then, here comes the teacher to the rescue. Sure. And the teachers got the bullies to stop bullying me, and life improved. Of course, they didn't stop it entirely, but it certainly was reduced substantially, and that made a big difference. And so, sometimes, unfortunately, it doesn't always work in a favorable situation like I described. Unfortunately, sometimes the person in authority is the bully. Well, then you're in trouble. Well, I guess it's like, look out. As I said, you have to evaluate each situation differently. Use your best judgment. You don't want to set yourself up for misfortune by making the wrong decision. Then again, you don't want to be bullied or suffer either. You have to figure out some way to wriggle your way out of the mess. How to work your way through the maze, so to speak. Good luck. It's a lot of tough decisions. But perhaps one of the best ways to solve this problem of the bully in authority, well, is what I've been talking about all along. Who watches the watchers? Who monitors those in authority? Yeah, I bet you want someone monitoring that bully now, don't you? Well, if you're lucky, there is. And you could appeal to him or her, and perhaps they can take measures to restrict the bullying authority or change their behavior. Sure. And so, you see where I'm going. We need these people to watch and monitor those in authority. Those in authority can abuse their authority in many ways. Sure. So you have to think of where authority might come from? Well, sometimes it's arbitrary. Someone just decides, I'm an authority. They might put on a hat or dress in a certain uniform or arm themselves with some sort of weapon, and they say, I'm in control. And they might come up with some crazy reason why they are, but in reality, it's just arbitrary. Something they felt like doing. They felt like being an authority. They felt like being in control. They thought if they're an authority, if they're in control, well, they have an advantage over you and whoever else they have authority over. So that's how authority often starts, because they want to take advantage of you. They want to control you. They want to restrict you so they can benefit. This probably applies in most situations of authority. So you have to look at it that way. Is that what's going on? Is someone trying to control me for their convenience and enjoyment, or make their life a little less painful because you're a pain in the ass? Well, I guess sometimes we are, particularly if we're a rambunctious child who's defiant and obnoxious. I guess like I was often with my marginal autism. So you have to watch out for that arbitrary authority. Often they would say it's some unique purpose that they have authority because, well, you have to look at that unique purpose. It might not be as solid as they say it is. Perhaps you could poke holes in their story, so to speak. Well, you have to look at authority and power. The more someone gains authority, the more power they get to control and influence you. Well, you know the rest of the story. You can fill in.
Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, CaseyWaters2 @CaseyWaters.com.